rather than how he played them. More than anybody before him, he showed us that artists can be divided into game players and game creators. Raphael, Rembrandt, or Velázquez were all amazing players in a game that already existed, a game that somebody else had invented. Duchamp, instead, was an incredible creator of games. I respect both kinds of artists, but am more drawn to the creation of methods and games. There are better tools for empowering people. I think of my piece as a game more than as a traditional closed object art piece. Obviously, it's a game with very simple and nearly stupid rules. But it has a degree of unpredictability, which is important because it keeps it alive. In art, games that are totally open are as useless as those that are totally regimented. I can create a game where the rules are: 1, take pencil and paper; 2, do whatever you want. The result is completely unpredictable, which is not bad. But it is also unpredictable if after you play it, you end up with a piece of art, which is less good. On the other extreme, I can create a game with regimented rules. 1, take this drawing, divide it into numbered areas. 2, the numbers indicate colors that you should have available. 3, fill the areas with the corresponding colors. Here, the result is totally predictable in its result, and it still doesn't ensure that you end up with a piece of art. I used to tell my students to use a political analogy. The first extreme is libertarianism at its worst. The second extreme is dictatorship at its worst. The truth is in democracy at its best, that is, a body of agreed-on laws that ensures a fair distribution of power and the freedom of each citizen without the possibility of doing any harm. It is the most tricky and difficult option, both in politics and in art. But I want to continue with nomenclature. Many years ago, and as an extreme caricature, I hypothesized that back in the Stone Ages, somebody made a weird object that amazed everybody into a sense of awe. There was no word for it yet, so somebody just called it art, or whatever equivalent there might have been in Neanderthalese. That event constituted a great accomplishment and was memorable. It filled what we now study as the history of art. It created a great market for galleries, and it fostered the industries of art schools and art residencies. The only problem is that from then on, people tried to make things to fit the word art instead of replicating the conditions for awe. They just worked within the word. Since then, in the process of reproductions, or by using models of models, the whole production of art became a debased, non-awe-inspiring echo of that first experience. So naming is both an act of use of power and an act of restriction. In an unrelated thought process, but concurrently, I also wondered about the relation there might be between the notions of God and that of art. Both cannot be precisely defined, and we resort to describe what they are not rather than what they are. A precise description would be blasphemy in one case and obliteration in the other, or so they believe. These things came together for me very recently while I was reading a book called Naming Infinity. It deals with the history of a group of Russian mathematicians who during the first years of the 20th century used mathematics as a form of meditation and connected set theory of George Cantor with a practice called name worshipping. Name worshippers believe that they can reach God by endlessly repeating the word God or the word Christ. The subsequent theological polemic was about the danger of adoring the Word instead of adoring God, and thus committing heresy. If the name of God is God, and there are many languages to mention Him, there might be some polytheism operating here, since the Word and God would change accordingly. In any case, it was the mathematician Pavel Florensky who figured that both God and mathematical sets were made real by naming them, and that, as he said, the set of all sets might be God himself. Although I don't believe in God, or at least I refrain from taking sides on the issue, I always smell a faint odor of blasphemy when making art. If there is a God, who am I to invoke omnipotence and try to improve or complete the divine oeuvre? And then we call something art or designate it as such. We adore it via contemplation, and we deposit money, offerings in its honor. Lately, I'm having the hunch that art, at least as we are mostly understanding it today, is a leftover from pre-literate cultures, and therefore a rather anachronistic activity. I'm too lazy and ill-equipped to prove my point. But all the above, and you can add to my arguments the intersection of aura and art with religious halo, leads me to be very skeptical about how well we're pursuing our profession. Are we doing things for the present and future, or are we just refining the past? Modernism started as a timid shift by introducing analytical tools into the academic art production that was prevalent during the middle of the 19th century. Artists took single components of what then was believed to be an integral and synthesizing work of art. They used whatever part they chose as a starting point and then expanded it to take the space of the full piece. This was a good, though small, step forward to consider ideas as an intrinsic part of art. Until then, ideas functioned as a topic for illustration or for function, but remained as something independent. Implicit in the modernist move was the ability not just to make in the sense of manufacturing, but also to make order, to organize in a new order, using guidelines set down by the artist. It took a while more for conceptualist art to arrive and put all this on the table with some clarity. Although it must also be said that this particular contribution has not yet been acknowledged because the formalism of tendencies of the 20th century obscured it. Conceptualism not only allowed for the literate mind to develop systems of order in art, but it also helped to clarify that art is about solving problems. It made clear that all art done since the first creation of the word art may be observed and criticized from the point of view of problem solving. Questions raised in front of artworks are not anymore about if they make us feel good or disturb us, if we like them or not. The questions now are a little more pointed. Is the artist presenting us with an interesting problem? Is the artist solving it well, as perfect as possible, in fact? Did the artist expand our knowledge? Can we take it from there? All these questions were always present, but were hidden in sensorial satisfaction, in misuse of taste, and more lately, in desperately trying to conquer the market, and thus shifting art from shaping culture into a home industry or more. So, now that these issues are somewhat clearer, we can address empowerment. In conceptualist terms, it would be finding the balance between the power of naming and the restrictions given by the name. During a boring faculty meeting in my university during September of 1970, I had a non-mystical epiphany. I realized that when I made a dot on a piece of paper, I was changing the universe forever. As a matter of fact, I did make that dot right then and there, and with it, an apparently modest act, I forced any subsequent inventory of the universe, that is, the list of names that composes it, to register my change. It was an enormous assumption of power, one that, to my surprise, the few colleagues I immediately shared it with failed to recognize. When I told them, they only rewarded me with a puzzled look and a mild smile that preceded their turning around and leaving. What they missed is that I found a crucial crossroad. Confronted with my ability to change the universe, I now had to decide if I kept this power for myself or if I shared it with everybody. Monopolizing it would define me as a traditional artist. The power would help me to cement my individual reputation and hopefully wrest the market from my colleagues to become richer and more famous than any of them. On the other hand, sharing it would mean to recognize openly that art has an educational function and that it should lead to develop creativity in everybody else. I should assert the intelligence of others rather than serve to declare one's own. It would mean, as a consequence, that there is no real difference between creating and educating. And it would also mean that I should look at everything in terms of distribution of power and the inequalities that exist in that distribution. Idiot that I am, I chose the second option. Our relation with the universe probably is much more complex than we might believe. For instance, it's not clear if we found the universe or if the universe found us. The act of nomenclature somehow makes us believe that the power is shifted over to us. We called it universe, after all. We believed that we took possession of it and then started researching and poking into it, which is a form of refining nomenclature and asserting power. When I was 8 years old, I had decided that the universe was a cube. It didn't take me very far. Much later, and jokingly, I thought of it as a mass of cotton candy. In spite of the humor, this actually was a serious improvement on my cube. The dot for the inventory, the cube, the cotton candy, all were my way of interfering with a given order or giving one to things that somebody else had appropriated without consulting me. On a selfishly individualist level, they were an expression of my resentment against what I perceived as an abuse of power. A lot of art is produced venting this frustration, and that is why art for so many artists is a therapeutic tool. The dot, however, that power to alter the universe, is something much more important than personal therapy. It provided me, and hopefully others, with the parameters for my actions. It gave me the precise distance from what I am to what we can do.